One of my favorite topics for review on this channel is items that are out of production in Yamaha's catalog, as in they stopped making them decades ago. For instance, this Yamaha YTR 6335H trumpet that belongs to my friend Tanner. I reviewed it ages ago. You can find that up in the top right corner if you want. It's not a great review, but I do have another fun video analysis involving this instrument coming up before I do give it back to Tanner. But before I get too far off topic, that is not the topic for today's video. Instead, we are looking at the sort of mouthpieces these old Yamaha instruments were supplied with. Welcome back to Mouthpiece Spotlight. How's it going, everybody? It's your host Sam here, coming back at you once again with another episode of Mouthpiece Spotlight. I hope you're all doing well, and I appreciate you tuning in as per usual. This is going to be a fun Spotlight episode because rather than honing in on one particular mouthpiece and talking about exactly how many millimeters across it is and exactly how it plays, we're instead going to take a more bird's eye view at Yamaha's discontinued catalog, and we're going to look at those mouthpieces that they used to make and maybe talk a little bit about how they stack up to the modern ones. Now, as a necessary tangent here, I'm going to show you more trumpets. If there is one thing to take away from Yamaha's history as a brass manufacturer, what you should know is that their professional designs, like these two, were based very heavily on one company in particular, Schilke. The work of Reinhold Schilke was copied across many makers in the industry, but Yamaha notably was one of them. Here I have two similar examples from the Yamaha family tree. This is an old 3-digit model number, a YTR 732, obviously no longer in production and probably even older, if anything, than that 6335. And then the later, much more recent, Bobby Shoe Gen 1, the 8310Z. And both of these instruments are designed off of the Schilke B7. They both have step bore lead pipes and tuning slides with the distinctive reverse lead pipe design, medium bore valve sections, and full 5-inch bells. This is an interesting combination of specifications that I believe Reinhold Schilke was the one to perfect, and as you may suspect, just as Yamaha's early trumpet designs were so heavily influenced by Schilke's, so too were their early trumpet mouthpieces. You'll notice the early Yamaha trumpet mouthpieces look like they're modeled after Schilke blanks, as opposed to modern Yamaha mouthpieces which look much more like their Bach counterparts, even if they still use what is essentially the Schilke numbering system with slight differences. That's a whole can of worms we'll have to unpack another time. But nonetheless, note the visual similarity as far as the old Yamaha mouthpieces go to Schilke mouthpieces as opposed to the new ones. Joining me here today for this video are 4 old-style Yamaha mouthpieces, and we're going to look at each one in turn. Firstly, we have the mouthpiece that came stock with Yamaha cornet of the era, and it is also the smallest of the 4 that I own. This is the Yamaha 9. Now, something to note here is, as you might know, the Yamaha and Schilke scales are intuitive in the sense that as the number on the mouthpiece gets larger, so too, generally, does the inner diameter or the relative size of the mouthpiece on your chops. What you should note is that the Bach system is the opposite of that. As the number gets larger, the feel of the mouthpiece actually gets smaller. And the two scales should, in theory, have a converging point since they use similar numbers on a similar order of magnitude. The 9 is approximately, I would say, where that happens. The Yamaha 9 is pretty similar to a Bach 9C or 10C, as in pretty dang small. I can't play mouthpieces like this very effectively. It is nice plugging this into my Yamaha 334 cornet because that thing sounds nice pretty much regardless of mouthpiece choice, but nonetheless, this is the kind of mouthpiece where you see a lot of rim and not a lot of cup. Next up is what came stock with Yamaha's trumpets for a very long time, and it is their Yamaha 11. You may be familiar with the 11B4 or 11C4 that typically come stock with Yamaha trumpets nowadays, and those are supposed to be imitations of a shallower 7C and a normal 7C, respectively. The B4 indicates that it's actually closer to a 7D, and in fact, some Bach 7Cs these days are manufactured so much deeper than a nominal C that it's almost not a fair comparison. The 7C is absolutely all over the place. That's another can of worms we'll have to inspect another time because we really can't get into that now. But if you look at Yamaha's comparison chart, they actually liken this old style 11 to the Bach 6C. And I would say that's fairly accurate. I have a Bach New York 6C that actually has a very similar and similarly comfortable rim design to this. This is flatter than most rims I can generally play on, but it does feel really nice on the face. There's a decent amount of cushion, again, that I don't deal with particularly well, and there's not enough cup for my liking. It is pretty much your nominal Bach C, considering there's no letter on the Schilke or Yamaha scale, generally means middle of the road. But nonetheless, this is the mouthpiece you see by far the most frequently when you see this style of blank. Getting into slightly rarer territory now, we have the Yamaha 16. This is by far the most usable of the 4 mouthpieces for me, because I am a Bach 1.5C, 1.25C type player, although I like deeper cups, but that's another matter. And this is right up that alley. At this point, we see a rim that is functionally quite similar to a Bach, which is to say it's quite a bit narrower, quite a bit more rounded, and the high point on the rim is not too far towards the center to where it's actually making the mouthpiece feel more squared in. It's a little bit more open of a feel. And definitely it's a nice spacious cup, maybe a little bit more V, but to be honest, some Bach 1.5Cs come out of the factory a little bit V-cupped in my opinion. So I think this is really close to a Bach 1.5C, and so it feels. It works really well down low, really well up high, for me personally, and generally is the most agreeable out of the four, I would say. And this last one is really a hoot. It is the Yamaha 22. Now, once you get into, I would say, past 20 territory, the 20 is okay. The 22, the 24 in Schilke's lineup, that's where you really start having issues between the mouthpiece and your instrument, where the mouthpiece is so large that it's causing your instrument to sound a little bit tubby, not very centered, the pitch tends to go flat in the upper register. Unfortunately, this 22 it's not as bad as the Schilke 24 that I reviewed a while ago, which you can find up in the card, but it is crossing into that same ilk to where it's kind of hard to keep the pitch up in the upper register, and it's a little bit hard to center the sound. I do quite like the sound, and I think it'd be an effective second trumpet mouthpiece in orchestra maybe, but nonetheless not quite my personal cup of tea. This is quite a rare find though, and I really just figured like I needed it for my collection. I got it from a good friend in Canada who was willing to give me a really good price on it. Shout out Jeff. But yeah, as you would come to expect from either the Schilke or the Yamaha scale, the 22 is quite a large cup. Not too deep, but quite wide, and it once again has that nice comfy rim that's a little bit thinner than the smaller sizes. It's interesting how that goes, but generally smaller cups have thicker rims and vice versa. So this is quite a thin rim, and it's quite rounded, and it really does allow me a lot of flexibility considering how big the cup is. And worthy of note is that with the 16, my favorite of the four, I actually got the original box. Take a look at this. It is pretty awesome. It's not very often that you get the original box with these old mouthpieces. It's kind of like getting a Bach Mount Vernon box, where it's really old, and you can see how much sort of the marketing imagery of these brands has changed over time. Apparently this thing cost $10.95 back in the day. That's pretty cool. Now you may have heard me mention that this blank design actually applied to Yamaha's whole brass lineup. Even though Schilke wasn't doing as much of the low brass stuff at the time, Yamaha definitely took that blank shape and adapted it to basically every instrument. I've seen a couple of them in the wild myself. I reviewed a Yamaha 47 for trombone that had that blank. You can once again find that up there. I've got an upcoming review on their old 12 F3D for flugelhorn that had that old design, and here are just a smattering of pictures from the internet of old-style Yamaha mouthpieces across, a deeper cornet cup, trombone, large and small shank, tuba. This design was pretty prevalent. Now, it still doesn't quite feel right to do a mouthpiece spotlight without actually playing each of the mouthpieces in question, even if that's really not the focus of the video. This is more of just a bird's eye perspective. But, like I said, it just doesn't feel right. So instead of playing for you guys, I'm going to hold that off with another tangent. How about that? I'm going to introduce these two instruments here so that you get a sense of what's going on. These are, once again, discontinued Yamahas in some manner of speaking, and the kind of instruments that would have been supplied with these mouthpieces. In fact, the cornet came with the 9, and the trumpet came with the 11. Shocker, right? So I mentioned that one. That is the Yamaha YCR 334 cornet. Very dark sound, regardless of which mouthpiece you plug into it. I've plugged essentially lead cornet mouthpieces into it, very shallow cups, and it still, if you play it softly, sounds very dark and woofy. This thing is almost a mini flugelhorn if you put in like a traditional brass band cup. The other instrument is a Yamaha, kind of. That trumpet you see there is actually a Nikon YTR 332 and not technically a Yamaha. Now, this is where it gets a little bit sticky. I should know this better than I probably do now that I'm here rambling to you about it. But essentially, Yamaha acquired the Nikon company and its assets and its designs around 1970. So I suspect this instrument is either from the late 1960s or was a bunch of spare parts from the Nikon factory that Yamaha picked up and then put together in the early 70s. But nonetheless, it says Nikon on it rather than Yamaha, but everything about it is identical to its analogous counterpart, the Yamaha YTR 332. It's the same exact thing. Medium bore, large bell, red brass bell for that matter. That was the case for a lot of these 3 series instruments. And both of these are really fun instruments. I got both of them pretty inexpensively. I think for both of them in total I paid under $500, and that's a pretty good deal at the moment in this current economy. And both of these instruments, like I said, were supplied with these type of mouthpieces and match up fairly well. So, finally, at long last, let's listen to all 4. I should make a couple caveats as we start talking about my playing impressions here, which I am going to try and keep fairly brief for the purposes of this video. But first things first, this is not at all a fair comparison here. Like I said, this cornet sounds dark basically no matter the mouthpiece you plug into it, and as a result, I think the 9 sounds a little bit more approachable than it actually did feel to me, because the cornet sounds so much darker. It definitely is not a mouthpiece I can play on regularly, but nonetheless, that cornet sounds good with pretty much anything. And even though the 332 is a relatively dark-sounding trumpet, we're talking different orders of magnitude here entirely. It is interesting, though, looking at these old-style mouthpieces and playing on them, and although I don't have the exact matches of sizes to their modern equivalents, for instance, the only 16C4 I have is Yamaha's heavyweight blank, and it's been a while since I've played on their 11C4. I've certainly never played a 9C4 or a 22C4, which doesn't exist in Yamaha's modern lineup. They only go up to 18C4. But even though I haven't played the exact size matches, I've played enough of the modern Bach blank Yamaha type mouthpieces to observe a little bit of a difference. It's not too pronounced. First things first, I would say the older rims are more preferable for me as a player. What you'll notice if you look at Yamaha's modern catalog of mouthpieces is there is very much a gravitation towards blank C4. And that last 4 there refers to the rim contour of the mouthpiece. While that doesn't necessarily, it can, influence the perceived size of the mouthpiece on the chops, it does very much influence the feel and your articulations and your flexibility and your endurance. That is one thing that I don't necessarily like about the Yamaha catalog in a modern sense, is the fact that all of them use this 4 rim. For reference here, all of these mouthpieces that are just a single number, the 9 or the 16 or the 11, etc., they don't have a number actually marked that specifies the rim contour. And what that implies in the Schilke catalog, generally speaking, is a 3 rim, which is the middle of the road. Their rims are on a scale from 1 being the sharpest and roundest to the 5 being the broadest and the flattest, and 3 sits right in the middle. And Schilke's logic was, well, if it's the middle of the road, we don't need to specify it, it'll be implied. And so a Schilke 18, for instance, like I've got, implies a C cup, which is in the middle between A and E, and a 3 rim, which is midway between that 1 and 5, and a C backbore, once again, midway in between A and E. Yamaha's rationale was fairly similar. And as a result, I think these older Yamaha rims feel a little bit more approachable to me. In case you're not familiar, I strongly prefer a more rounded and thinner rim contour. So I much prefer Schilke 2s and 3s to Schilke and Yamaha 4s. While my personal sound concept doesn't fall in line with super pingy, tight articulations, I do like a mouthpiece that facilitates tighter articulations because it means I don't have to think about them so much. If I play on a 16C4, I do feel myself working slightly harder for the articulations than I do for this 16 here, or a Bach 1.5C. And additionally, I find I have much better flexibility and maneuverability on thinner or rounder rims. If I play a really flat rim, I find that it's just basically iron to my face and I can't change partials nearly as easily, and it tires me out much quicker, ironically, even though a flat and wide rim is supposed to provide extra comfort. It does the opposite for me. But anyway, that's the reason I prefer these old style mouthpieces a little bit over Yamaha's modern catalog. At the very least, I wish Yamaha could offer C3s or C2s or, rim contours that work a little bit better for me personally. Sound-wise, I wouldn't say there's too pronounced of a difference between Yamaha's older and newer mouthpieces. I would say the articulations are indeed a little bit more pingy on these old-style ones, and I think they're a little bit more liable to light up and become a little bit brighter in nature. Definitely at the end of each of those clips when I went up to the high register, I definitely felt the mouthpiece sort of fire up, like I'd really pressed on the gas and revved the engine a little bit, and I think that happens to a greater extent on these than on Yamaha's newer Bach-style mouthpieces. I think there is a little bit of blank play here, where the blank of the mouthpiece does genuinely affect the sort of overtones that are present in the sound, and I think that is where we round out today's Mouthpiece Spotlight. I'm hoping it didn't turn out too rambly. It probably did, knowing me. But nonetheless, I hope you enjoyed the ride and learned something along the way. I've had a lot of fun analyzing these old-style Yamaha mouthpieces, and I hope you've enjoyed learning about them. Make sure to leave a like and a comment down below if you did. I've got more Mouthpiece Spotlights for you to check out, once again, up in the playlist in the top right corner. And I think until next time, I will call it quits for the day, and see you on the flip side. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you want to support the creation of bigger and better content on the Samuel Plays Brass channel, have your name featured right here, and a whole host of other perks and benefits, then please consider pledging your support at patreon.com/SamuelPlaysBrass. For now, you can find more videos in the end screen cards to my left.